Good morning, everyone. Can everybody hear me all right? All right, a little bit of a late start here. Overslept. But that won't stop us. Okay. So this morning we are hopefully going to finish a bunch of this Gatsby theme that we've been working on. There's the cat, bamboo. So last time we kind of finished off with bits and pieces of this Gatsby theme articles. And I have since worked a little bit more on it. Oh, just open this. Mostly just cleaning up the kind of the hacky stuff we ended up having to do before. Dealing with Gatsby being rather aggressive in finding templates or anything with GraphQL queries. But we've managed to get it to work. Hey Ryan, glad to see you back again. So this is sort of the state that we're at right now. There's one more section that I'm shooting to add, and then we'll get into some design work for that. Central Coast, well, coast as in I'm on a lake, up in Wisconsin. So yeah, it's a tad early, but you know how it goes. Hopefully I can hit all of you East Coast crowd and probably some Europeans. So this is the section that we're hoping to add right now. There's professional engagements, which is basically just going to be, sort of these are the things that I've done in my professional life, or talks or conferences or that sort of thing. But as you can see, I'd like to enable the possibility of having more than just text. We got some images. Apparently we have a broken YouTube embed, which is interesting. But that pretty much means that we're going to have to use Markdown to deal with this. And it's sort of seems to be a Gatsby thing to have one Markdown file per page. But we're not following that at all. Right now, this whole section, the This Is Me, is a Markdown file, and we're probably going to have a whole bunch more to do this professional engagements, but it is what it is. So I think how we're going to deal with this is that we're going to have the user create a new folder. And it'll likely be configurable like this articles folder that we have here. I would definitely take default folder recommendation names. But since this is what I decided on calling it a while ago, I'm gonna just go with that right now, assuming I can spell. Okay. And I think what we're gonna do is, to get things rolling, is just copy one of these other markdown files. Oops. Paste. I guess we'll just start off with this. And we'll just dump this in here for right now. Just so we have some content that's slightly different than the content that's directly above it. We'll rename that. And then, so Gatsby works for those that are unfamiliar. It sources data from potentially any place. And in this case, it's a file system one, and we've decided to only source data from the articles and from the main folder currently. So we need to add another config to deal with our new professional engagements folder. This will definitely be interesting to see how many times I can spell engagements correctly. Especially since the caffeine is still kicking in. Okay, so we should have a node. So if we look at the GraphQL, all MDX and front matter is the portion of text that shows up at the top. So it's usually separated by 3 dashes. And you can put potentially any information in there. And it processes it and kind of strips it out of the file. So it's not showing up currently, so it looks like we probably need to rebuild here. There we go. So we got that MDX file. And now we need to decide how to query just for that folder, I guess, because we want to. Good morning, Ben. We want to be able to only show files from that folder, that markdown folder on this professional engagements. And then in the future, we can always make it data agnostic, but we'll just make it work first. So let's explore the node a little bit to see if there's something that we can specifically pull off that will let us differentiate it from other. And I'm thinking if we go to the parent, that'll go to the file node. Don't know if any of these are really going to be helpful to us. need to go into the actual file node. And this should give us, when you set the config, you also set this name, and there's a path. It might be easiest just to use that name for right now. So you can see here we have a name, and that's the file name, and the relative path is just the and source instance name is that name that we set in the config. We got two cats jumping around here. Directory, no. So we don't really want to use the absolute directory, because that's pretty much impossible to config. Dynamically, that is. Yeah, we might just need to go with, what does root look like? Nope. That won't work. I thought there was just like a folder. But I'm not seeing it right now. Base, maybe? Nope. It's kind of weird. Base and relative path are exactly the same. Okay, well, let's go with the source instance name for right now. We'll leave the name on here so we can differentiate. Filter parent. We're not really going to be able to filter on that, are we? So we might actually want to start with an all file query. So all file, because we're only going to put markdown in this filter, so it shouldn't really matter. So if we do filter, source instance name equals, let's copy and paste that so I don't need to fail at typing engagements. Edges, node, child MDX, body, and title we can probably do. There we go. So I think that's probably going to be our query to start, and that would allow somebody to drop any MDX they want in there, and we can basically output a full grid for them. And then we'll have to come back later and kind of make a diagnostic, but I sort of assume that everybody will generally use Markdown for that spot. So let's get a component going here. So right now we've got two templates that we use. One actually brings in the articles, so it's dynamically pulling in the dynamically pulling in the articles here in this section if you have it enabled and you have that plugin. And that the higher order component is this piece, which is essentially defaulting to use landing and about. It would kind of be nice to make it easier to config what what components you end up having here as well. But we're kind of punting on that for right now. So let's just go ahead and copy this about, because it's going to be sort of similar. And we'll copy that query that we made. Gatsby theme homepage, professional engagements. Sort of another thing about this too is that potentially somebody might want to have multiple sections and kind of split it up. So they might have a section for speaking and a section for YouTube videos or something like that. So this might be a component that we can use in more general fashion, and that can be used multiple times. Which might actually, now that I think about it, is probably something we can just, when we import it here, we can map over it, and it'll just be dependent on how many folders are in that professional engagements. So if they've got folders, nested folders, then we can make a different section for each folder. But we'll stick with one right now. So let's go ahead and import this. I don't know if the organization matters much, but I kind of like it to be in some sort of reasonable order. Apologies if my cats are being loud on the desk. They're currently walking behind the camera, and you might see a... Okay, let's not get too... Okay. Cats always keeping you on your toes. At least these do. Okay. So we've got component. We're going to go ahead and just rename this now, so we can just use a consistent name when we make this more data agnostic. I really wish there was a better name for this. But we will keep going with it, I guess. So Gatsby has in the concept of static queries and page queries. This is a static query, as you can see here, and we're just using a render prop. Let's update all of this. So basically, we can theoretically throw this component anywhere, and it'll pull the data using this query. Whereas page queries it's essentially one per page. Okay, so we want to do flex. We don't have site anymore, nor do we have site links, so we can get rid of that. We will be mapping over. We can map over this. And we will be rendering the engagement body. And I think we're actually going to leave the title out of this so we can get rid of title. All we really want is the body. The title It's probably more just for the user. Or the file name and the title is more for the user, and we'll just use whatever content's in there. Let's update this component name. Engagements. Okay, let's see if that works. So, engagements is not. So this is sort of a cheeky thing to do. It was easier to do in class-based React. But if you stick a console.log in here, it will drop whatever data it is into the console here. And I'm guessing we probably need to say, it's probably a nested object. Yeah. Edges. Forgot about the edges. I think we're actually going to switch to, there's also nodes. It's just a little bit less nested. Especially since we're already getting pretty deep as far as the nesting goes. So that's what our data looks like there. So we need to do a couple more. So nodes is the array. We're going to map over engagements. Nodes. Oop. And then from that array, we will have a child mdx then body. So here will be child mdx and then body. There we go. Got something. I always forget about that key prop. Key equals. And maybe actually. How should we differentiate? I think I'm actually going to use the title. No, I don't really want to force somebody to use that. What else do we have in here that we can use as a key prop? Probably just the ID, I guess. Or I suppose we can actually just, we're on file. So we could pull the name. That might be enough. Okay. So we got sort of that first piece. Now as far as formatting goes, I'm not totally sold on using the sort of grid layout that we have currently on here. But I think it will still be easy enough to use Flexbox and get something that looks decent. It's this sort of grid layout is nice because you can pack it tight, but then it's sort of hard to do that dynamically, I would presume. So this is something that we pulled up last time we were working on this. CSS Tricks has a good CSS Tricks has a good guide on Flexbox that I tend to come back to pretty often. So I think what we'll probably end up doing is setting I like the vertical layout, but I don't know if we're going to be able to get that very easily. Is there a way that we can potentially limit? Yeah, that's how you learn that on the CSS Tricks, Ryan. They definitely got some good stuff there. I appreciate what they do. So a nice thing that we might end up using is this order, where the user can specify what order they want these placed in. And it might be easiest just to deal with that in CSS. You know, it's weird how it works, where some things I look at once and I just have it down, and whatever it is, I can never remember all the Flexbox stuff. I think it's because I do it. When I work on Flexbox, it tends to be over some small time periods. And I'll use it a bunch, and then I won't use it for months. And then I get good at it, and then it goes away. So we do want a wrap. So what we can do is we can set a column. We can set a minimum height, and then but there's nothing that's really capping the height of the container that will force a wrap if we do a column. And I don't really want to get into trying to dictate the height of that, because that's going to change depending on the size of screen you're looking at, and that's sort of just chasing our tail. So I guess we'll just go with row for right now. So align items top is not a thing. It's actually flex start as the default. So I was actually using flex start before, and I just had not noticed that. So I think what we're going to do is set the box width to be something like, it's not quite 100% width at this point. So if we say something like 30%, so this is part of Theme UI, which actually uses styled system, and it actually does its breakpoints using an array, which is great. I mean, on paper it looks cool. When I was first reading about it, I was like, yeah, that's useful. But when I actually started using it in practice, I was surprised how much I ended up liking it. So if we look at our default theme, which is, I moved it into the theme components. So in our theme, we actually specify breakpoints, and you specify it as an array. And then anytime you want a value to be based on those breakpoints, you just give it an array. So if it's just a single string or a single value, then it will just use that for all X number of breakpoints. But if you give it an array, then it'll match. It'll basically like loop over that array and match each one of these to the breakpoints. So this first 85% is my smallest breakpoint, so effectively mobile, and then 30% and 30% will be in bigger screens. So we might want to actually bump that second breakpoint up a little bit. So you can see here that we're going. So 30% probably feels pretty decent, and then once we go to mobile, then it goes up to the 85%. And we'll probably want to go back and make this stuff consistent, more consistent at least. Yep, we definitely need to. Let's plan for 2 of them there being there. So we'll say something like 45%. Hope. The breakpoints are mapped to when you use theme UI, you give it a theme file, and one of the config options is this breakpoints array. So that's what it ends up mapping to. And all you need to do is define it in theoretically one spot, and then it will. Yep. Yeah. So there's the theme UI works. It essentially is using emotion at the core of it, and it will use. Of course, I don't have one on here. There's some isolation stuff that I have going on here, but if you use this SX prop, and this is getting into the isolation stuff that we have going on. But basically it's React uses JSX, and it will compile that to functions. But using this, normally this would be a theme UI thing, or an emotion thing rather, but I'm using this isolation so we can essentially have multiple themes going on. But we're saying, here you can see we do import React, and we're basically saying we want React to take this and process the JSX and turn it into functions. Whereas in here we're saying, well, we don't want React to take care of that. We want this, whatever this function or whatever this import is, to take care of that processing. And that's what this, the name escapes me. What's, it's gonna come to me later. This little comment thing up at the top, that plus this import will tell the Webpack plus Babel to decide what function is actually called on this to process it. And in that process, it looks for this SX prop, and then that's when it kind of merges these things together. A custom breakpoint. So, I guess it depends what you are wanting to do with a custom breakpoint. So one of the options is that you could potentially run multiple themes. So with this theme isolation stuff, I guess sort of the default behavior of theme UI is to have one theme per site. And there's been some work done to enable isolation of that stuff, where you can have multiple themes per site, and that would be valuable if you want to have a specific theme for a specific page, which usually doesn't seem like something that would be useful, but when you're doing Gatsby Themes, you are essentially installing a theme that will control a portion of your site. And if you set only 3 breakpoints in your Gatsby theme, and the user is setting 4 breakpoints, then obviously things start to get real funky real fast. So that would probably be the most, how shall I word this? I don't know if aggressive is the right word, but the sledgehammer hitting a nail kind of situation. And then there's probably, for the most part, I haven't found a need to do anything that's sort of in between that, where there's a situation where I only want to use 2 breakpoints, or I guess when you're defining your breakpoints, the breakpoints that you define globally, it's seems to be 3 or 4 is pretty typical. That's essentially going to be the max number of breakpoints that you want. And if you want to only adjust things to be to happen in less breakpoints, so if you only wanted a function to happen in 2 of the 4 breakpoints, you can do here. I think I have a good example. We've got a hamburger menu. So up here you can see we've got navigation, and when we get smaller than a certain amount, it switches to this hamburger menu. And essentially we end up, here we have a display, and I'm just hiding portions of it using display, flex and none. And you can see here that I only want this to ever show up on the lowest breakpoint. So I just set the key or the value for the other 2 breakpoints to be exactly the same. So it acts like we only have 2 breakpoints, even though we have defined 3 in the global theme JS file. Does that make sense, Ryan? I think for the most part that whatever you define in the global theme JS file will be the maximum number of breakpoints you want, and if you ever want to use less, then you just use the same value for multiple breakpoints. And that's covered every situation that I've needed so far. I can't say I'm an expert by any means, but in the sites that I've made with it so far, that has served me quite well. Okay. So, getting back to what we were working on, we've got this box, and we've got the 3 breakpoints set. It will essentially take up the whole container once we get to the smallest width. Oop. And then it's going to get smaller once the screen gets bigger. So let's throw in a couple more of those just so we have something to compare against. Yeah, no problem. I mean, if anybody has any questions, I do not mind explaining. And sometimes it's one of those things that once you say it out loud, it's the whole rubber ducky situation. You say it out loud and you're like, why was I doing that? So we're just going to get really creative in our naming here. We'll just drop a handful of them in here so we have something to look at least. And you might notice that I tend to right click on here. For some reason my control key doesn't work the greatest. I haven't bothered to dig into why it's having issues, but sometimes when I press it, it doesn't actually register. So I've found myself just right-clicking more than I would normally. Make sure they all say the number that they are named as. Of course. Okay. So you can see for the most part, Gatsby will update its schema and its data every time you save. So it's got the file watcher through Webpack, which is sort of handy, but occasionally it does break. Okay. So I think that's probably sufficient for what we need to do with this for right now. We can effectively throw any type of data in this MDX file and it will give us any of these. One of the other things I had sort of started working on was images. There's an issue with one of the with the images that I haven't dug into yet, but so there's an image in here, and for some reason it's showing both the blurred version and the full version. So what this Gatsby component will do is it will automatically do that like blur up thing that Medium has, which is real nice. It does all the image processing stuff. When you get a lot of images, dealing with that at build time every time starts to become a bear, but I guess in this place a panda. Ha, ha. Come for the code, stay for the bad jokes. So I think that probably covers everything that we need for this professional engagements. I think what we do is double check to make sure that if they have no components here, we will not error out. So I'm just gonna on this side here go ahead and copy things out. Theme. So I just want to make sure that if our expectation is that we have files here and there are no files, that we don't have some big breakages that would scare somebody kind of jumping into this new. Okay, so you can see that I removed those. Schema updated. Let's go to the home page. Okay, so it's just not going to show up if there's no components, which is perfectly fine. And in some cases, I think it makes sense to deal with that at build time and not include components that end up being unused. But this is such a small component that I'm not super worried about that consideration, at least for the time being. So I'm gonna go ahead and just drop them back in there. We can commit this stuff, and then we can start looking at some design. And we'll delve into the theme UI stuff a little bit more. Okay. So just a quick rehash, we added a new source for our folder of MDX files. We imported it into the layout, which gets used in both of our templates. We created this new component, and then we have a bunch of examples in here. And I can do all that in one commit. Oh, forgot the M. Okay, so let's do some design. Now, I'm sure many a programmer has said this before, that they are not designers, and I by no means consider myself one either. But there's a couple websites that I found useful. There's this one that on the list of more people that you should follow if you're interested in this sort of stuff. Let's see if I can, nope, that's not it. Search Twitter. Forgot the P. He's been working on some interesting stuff. Blocks UI. He started this MDX, excuse me. But Blocks UI and Components UI are two interesting things to help essentially generate or do design portions of it. There's also some other programs like Figma and whatnot that I've not personally gotten into. But you can see here that there's sort of this out-of-the-box integration which is handy. So with you use Figma, Ryan? Yeah, I don't do enough design to really spend a whole bunch of time with that kind of stuff. Which probably bites me when I come to do any design, but it comes back to you can either operate in the space where your strengths lie or become a jack at all trades, I guess. So this actually will generate various themes. So one thing that we'll probably end up running into is with this isolation. Technically, the background is going to be dictated by the user's theme file. So in this case, we don't have a theme at all. And the only thing that we have is defined in our components. I think I'm just going to copy this over for right now. We'll work with that. So, when setting up theme UI, basically give it this theme.js file, which we kind of talked about. It also has a Gatsby plugin, which takes care of sort of the Gatsby is essentially doing a build time SSR, which stands for server-side React, and usually that's a pain to deal with. Documentation, here we go. But Gatsby kind of helps out with that, and this plugin hooks into that, and it'll make sure to process this stuff up front so you don't get that flash of styles when you first load something that you might see with a typical JSS or CSS and JS engine. So we've imported we've set the plugin in the config already. Let me just confirm that fact. Here we go. Gatsby plugin theme UI. And now to customize the theme, we need to put it in a Gatsby plugin theme UI folder. And the reason for this is that within Gatsby, particularly with the implementation of the shadows, or shadowing rather, it's essentially a web plugin that will resolve files in your folder prior to resolving files in node modules. So if you do an import through this typical import or require, there's a process that decides where to look, and it will look in certain folders first and eventually go down into the node modules to see if it can find it there. And what shadowing does is it tweaks that a bit, where if you have a folder in SRC that matches the name of a node module, it will use that file instead of the file that's in node modules. That becomes super powerful if somebody wants to customize a theme, but it also means that it's probably going to be hard to prevent or be cognizant of breaking changes when you're doing updates to themes, because the user could theoretically shadow any file in your theme, and there's a potential that any change you make could break some sort of shadowing that somebody did. So let's get things started back up here again. So it should start using this theme, and right now they've been set to be the same. What we'll likely see is we'll see these colors come through. I believe I'll have dark mode set in my browser, so it's going to use these values. We'll find out if that's correct. Let's see. Did this change at all? Doesn't seem like it actually changed. So one, I don't know if I would call it an oddity, but so one oddity that we'll probably end up dealing with is, since we're using this isolation, it's going to be using pieces from that are defined in our theme and pieces that are theoretically defined in the theme UI plugin, but we are shadowing. So we might end up having to do from in user land. So in our example, do multiple file shadows, which we'll kind of see how that works. That's sort of the thing that's developing. So I guess let's see, just so we get an idea of what is actually what. Right now our text color is set to be black. If we, in the theme UI isolation components, which is pretty much what we're using everywhere in our themes, if we would change the color of those, we should see it reflected. Except it's not. So I wonder if what we had hooked up previously is not, in fact, actually working. So this context.js imports are theme. No. I bet you we don't have this all hooked up. Okay. So let's make sure our background is coming in first. Because we've got a white background, so I'm assuming that we do not have any theme coming in right now. I believe it puts that on the body. Yeah, I'm not seeing any background color. So, Gatsby plugin. Just double check to make sure we need theme UI, Gatsby plugin UI, and emotion core. Let's just double check to make sure we've got those. Emotion core, theme UI, MDX, and the plugin. So it should be all added into our package already. We customize by dropping a file. Oh, that's what's getting us. So the default here is index.js, where I believe we have it called theme.js. I'm gonna guess that we probably need to restart this. There we go. Now we're getting some styles. Is my computer fan coming through at all? Let me know if that's coming through at all. I can see if I can play around with that a little bit. Okay, so we've got the styles that come through. And it's only coming through on some components, which is interesting. So let's just double check the about component. So it's using this MDX renderer, which should be the same situation that is happening here. Oh, actually it's not. This is just straight text, so we do need to adjust that. That's in the landing. So we set text as a P. So in our component, we want to say the text is coming from styles. So our default is span. So if we open up our theme file, text. So our default is span, and in theme UI, you can give it CSS properties, much like you would in JSX. And the one special thing it does is if you give it a variant, it will pull basically a group of styles out of your theme. So here we're saying we want to pull a variant of styles, and it would have to come up under a styles.root, and it's not, because our default here is a span. But I think in our case, we actually defined, do we have a span in here? We don't. I think I'm gonna define a span in here, since we have that as default. I'll just make it the same as P for right now. But here you can see that we're actually saying we want our text as the paragraph HTML element. So text. So this should be pulling from styles.p, and that uses the color of text, and text will pull from this. So it'll use the text property here, or if we're in dark mode, it'll use this one here. And that should go the same for the other pieces as well. So it should be using the body text. So just to make sure we don't have any odd thing happening there. Looks like that is not working. Code table. So by default, MDX will use, with the theme UI, it'll use the items in the styles, which is why we define it. So that's essentially going to control our markdown without having us to give any input. And the reason is you don't really have multiple components that you could each style separately. We have essentially the markdown component, and that gets processed. It processes that markdown up front, and then we aren't able to touch any of the components in there effectively. So this whole object gets used to do the styling for anything in there. So anything that's an MDX component should be styled. So you can kind of see that some of this stuff is not MDX. These were MDX. We just did these professional engagement section. And then this up here is not. But we do want to use the same styles. So if we say, let's just make sure we have things wired up so it's at least pulling in the colors correctly. So there's an issue with this variant prop. And I'm pretty certain that the dot notation works. So if we look at the theme UI, where would that be under? So one way you can do this is you can actually use a style component from theme UI, and it'll use these. You can use that dot notation there, but we've opted to make our own. It's probably under the SX prop. Yeah, so you can see there's a few options how you can use the CSS, you can use this SX prop. the reason you'd use the CSS would be if you're opting out of the theme. Margin of padding. Here, this explains if you want to look into this, the custom pragma stuff more. I guess they just call it a custom pragma comment. And you can read more up about that if you'd like. Where is this variant? Variants. So one thing that they sort of suggest is that you make variants for buttons. I'm guessing since that's sort of a top level design element, I guess you'd say. But I don't see why you couldn't just put that in the styles. So let's just double check the shape. So we don't have any we have fonts. I imagine this is probably the case. Well, no. Text, heading. Okay. So we've got the fonts, we have font weights, sizes, line heights. Yeah, we don't have a text. Which is that an issue? I wouldn't expect that it is. So these are all, when it says body, it's all referencing the fonts here, I believe. Except for the line heights, font weights, font sizes. Yeah, so these actually reference the line heights and font weights there, of which we don't actually do anymore. Come on, cat. Keep walking. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and grab this. I don't know if we're going to need this. I guess we can... Yeah, let's just do the whole thing. I imagine that this is a rather default sort of case. We don't need the font size in here. Let's take out the caps for right now. We do have a body, but for the most part we're just using heading. So that heading key will match this. This will match the properties up in here. So heading, we have a bold. And we currently have a heading and a body, which we call, and all of those call the body pieces. So let's copy that a bunch of places. So now our variant should be styles.p. P is calling color of text, font, family, weight, and line height of body. Weight, line height. font of body. So it should be using these. So if we look at just this text, you can see that it is coming through as that kind of component. But our font isn't coming through. So this stylus.p is still not working. So variant. So you can see here that they can be used. So in this case, it's saying a variant of text.heading would pull from text.heading. So just to see if the variant portion of our setup is working, if we do this text.body, this should interesting. So if we did save, right? Yep. So it kind of seems like our variant is not working, which is interesting. And this very well might be an issue with our isolated component. So let's take a look at that. So this is something that Chris Biscardi started working on. Well, that's not helpful at all. Here we go. So for the most part, we're using this. I imagine this is the piece that we're missing. So let's double check our provider. So it's using the React context to drive this functionality. So in our context file, our context file pretty much matches this. So we need to put some sort of wrap around our whole site. And that is here. So we've got our isolated theme provider, isolated theme context, which is exported, and the JSS X, our value of theme, is imported from theme. I'm not 100% certain what this piece is doing. As that is sort of the piece that we don't have so far. So each of our components does this JSX import and our context import. we're using this SX props. We know that portion of it works because we set the color to red and it worked. So it's just specifically using these variants. I think these components are yeah, I'm not sure what these components are doing. I assumed it was a MDX thing. And I'm not necessarily doubting my assumption there. I wonder if you actually need to like import the components into this piece. Let's try just to make sure. So we've got a component. I think this JSX here is just basically it's a an element, an H1 element. This is the value. These are the props. So that's sort of what the JSX is converting the this synthetic sugar into, is some sort of function that is in this shape. So here we're saying we have an H1 component and we will pass it the props. So if we would say we have a text component of which we're going to pass it the props. Components. Oh, that's why I looked wrong. We have a text component. And props. And then we're just going to pass it directly into our components. We are looking at the text component from text. Is it actually the, so this, oh it is on the same level because we're looking at wrap element right now. Okay. Okay. Well, it doesn't seem like that's the case, which is good because that would be kind of painful. It does look like it's pulling through some color though. Okay, so we've got color coming through. Oh, I forgot to put this in here. Text. So we do have some color coming through from the theme UI colors text. So let's make it something more obvious for right now. Okay, so you can see here that we've got colors coming through. This actually needs to be a component though. And we're gonna change in our theme some text colors so we can have something obvious when things are wired up correctly. Okay, so right now it is using this is set in our components. That's clearly not come through right either. So our hex is 192E. Where is that coming from? This comes back to, again, I feel like things are going to get slightly confusing since we've got multiple theme files going on. Okay, so it is coming through here. So we're pulling the text from userland, the text color value from userland. And this does not have, so it seems like our values are actually coming from the theme in userland, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's rather odd that the color is updating. So we have it set to text.body. Okay. But that doesn't actually set the text at all. So if we do styles.p, what are we looking at? Okay. So that seems to be coming through. Color text. Let's set color red. Huh. So it must just be coming through the body, I guess. Oh, these are the computed. Computed. This is the user agent style sheet. So why isn't the text getting colored red? So if we set the color to red here, it works. If I spell styles right, maybe it works. Nothing. So that color must be coming through. Yeah, it's just the default body. So it's setting that on the body. So let's try a different, so if this is text, we'll make a test one. It should be text dot test, and if we set the font color here to be red, let's make sure it's coming through this at least. Text dot test. Still the default color. So if we say the, the color, if we just say we want it to be primary, let's see if that comes through. So it's not pulling anything out of the theme at all, it seems like, because our primary color here you can see is sort of this minty green, which is honestly kind of a weird primary color, but what color is this? That 192. So it seems that this is not actually pulling from our theme file at all. So if we just put in a color, a color that isn't in the theme, it will just use the actual value. So if we say red, that isn't defined as a property in our theme at all. So it'll literally just use that value as the color in this case. So when we were testing before, we tested that was working and not if it was actually pulling values from our theme. So it looks like it's not even pulling values from our theme. So we want it to be this if it's going to pull something from our theme. So it seems like this is not actually wrapping anything. So it might be that what we actually forgot to do was have this wrap element wrap our site. And for the most part, everything is coming through this master layout. So this may be the best spot to wrap. That's got to be what it is. Let's say wrap element. So we just need to make sure to, and this is going to act like our provider for the React context. Hey, progress. Okay, so we just forgot to actually use the wrap element where we are applying our styles. So I'm going to assume that we don't need this. We can get rid of that. Okay. So you can see that we are, well, let's fix our text. Variant should be styles dot text. Okay. So that is now pulling in. We've got two themes going on. Theme.js is from our isolated components, and that's actually what's setting the colors. Because our test color is this B something or other. So if we would go back to our previous color, and then in here we want to get rid of that test. This. And then I think we've got down in here color red. Yep. So we're going to kind of need to be cognizant of where these values are coming from. I feel like it's probably going to be rather easy to lose track. But next time when we start editing this to a real site outside of our example one, we'll probably run into bugs dealing with that. So right now our heading is pulling in variant. We need our links. So our link element should come from variant. And it's either going to be an internal link or a Gatsby link. So I think we're just going to default to always be the A style. Styles A. So I wonder if these aren't actually so you can see up at the top our navigation is now themed, of which those are not great colors, but we have theming coming through. And a bunch of underlines. This is still broken. We'll have to come back and fix that. That seems to be. So I wonder if it looks like our component, our link component is correct. Oop. So site links. Yep, sure enough. So these site links originally were all external, and our link component didn't deal with external links, so I just used the anchor link HTML element. So let's switch those to be our link from our isolated So I've got some links coming through. Those links as the primary color. We're gonna have to probably change our primary color for our default. Although that's kind of nice, the underline there. I don't know if I like this. Being bullet points, so we're going to get rid of those bullet points. Oh, too much. And I think we just make those text components. So this might be why I might have been inconsistent on which component is the outer component. Which is why my links are inconsistent. Yeah, so if I make it text and then, if I make it text, so these all need to have the anchor link on the outside, and then I think they will look better. So we want to do text as a P element. Ooh. We want to wrap this whole thing in that. Okay. I think we're gonna force a space in here too. Why is Prettier eating that? That's rather annoying. Oh. Because there's a space already there. Okay. So let's clean up these other links so they use the primary color but aren't kind of washed out like that. They use the default text color. So we're going to look at our nav, which uses header. Let's close all these. And header does the logo, which may or may not currently be working. You can see our text is here. So our link here should be text. There we go, fixed that. And some article links. Let's get the footer while we're here. So we just have like a SVG heart that's copy pasted. Our fill is, so I think what we're going to do is change we've been trying not to import the custom pragma into any of our components in the theme to kind of keep that separation there. And we have a heart So we might just want to switch this to be like an SVG element. And then that will, we can do our custom pragma stuff there. So if we grab, what would be a good one? Button might be the easiest. So if we go here and copy this and just make this SVG. Seems I closed my header already. Let's close some of these things. Footer. So essentially just have a bunch of props on here. And we're already passing through the props. So that should be fine. So I think that'll work. Let's import and export out of our index file in our isolated components. Import SVG from SVG. And then we can import that into our footer. So now our heart component will become an SVG component. We will drop this into an SX. As will our fill, because we want to pull the fill from our keys. And it should be a primary. We're actually going to still pull it from the component though, but we'll set the default to be the primary color. So the children will be passed through, all of the props will be passed through, SX will be processed. So it should change the color of our heart. Yep. Okay. Now we need to update this link to also be text. All right, footer's done. You can see we've got our primary colors there. Now we just need a couple more links there, and then I think we've hit on all of the kind of the top level stuff here. That would be in our articles component. We're already importing text. You can see we have our heading set. So we've got a read and more and articles that we need to address. So it looks like our heading by default likely uses the primary color. So is this an H1? Yep. I don't know if I'm real thrilled with that being a header either. So I think I'm going to switch. Oh. Let's see. Oh, no, it isn't actually. Heading. So we actually have two components here. This is sort of the overall component, and then this is just doing the article pieces of it. So I don't like that as a H2. I think I'm going to switch this to be just text, because we don't really need that to be that large. And articles by default has a bunch of margin and whatnot. So I wonder if not quite sure how this will work, but we'll see. Oh, we do actually have two headings here, which is probably why we're that's not terrible. I think I am going to remove the margin on the bottom though. Margin bottom 0. Pixels. So if we use a value in there, it will actually pull it from the theme. So it'll use the bottom or the default margin. Except we're still getting margin on that element. There's nothing on the A, it's all on the H1. Articles, margin, bottom. Well, let's clean this up while I'm looking at it. I wonder why that SX is not coming through. Okay, so H1, you can see it's not even coming up in the font family, line, weight, font size. So I wonder if our heading actually does not pass through any SX props, so we might need to adjust that. Yep, that is the case. So SX should pass through, and then we will spread those into our SX that actually gets processed. There we go. Okay. So let's look at our articles page. I think that's probably not terrible. And just to confirm, it's using the primary color right now, and I'm pretty sure that primary color is what's defined in defined in the userland theme. So let's just adjust our we're specifically looking at the text color, or the primary color rather. So let's change that. Go away. So our primary color, let's go some pink. So if we change our primary color to be a pink in userland, you can see that that's not coming through. So if a user would actually want to change the primary color that we have set on our default isolated component, then they would also have to shadow they would have to shadow the themes theme as well. So I think it probably makes sense to do that just to confirm. So the isolated theme UI components, it is that theme.js is currently in the SRC, so I think this will work. We'll find out. So if we make a new folder here, call it isolated theme UI components, and we make a new file here called theme.js, and if we import user's theme from our userland, and it does export that by default. So we can say then export default. We're just going to use it directly right now, but you can merge in, which would probably be the better way to go about it. But okay, so we do have some pink as our primary. But these components are still actually using interesting. So these components are actually still using the isolated theme. So I think that's probably going to be something that we deal with next time. But for the most part, we've got the sort of a default theme, and we'll have to work on making sure the user can configure their theme. Oh, sorry. Ryan is stalking me. He's asking what exactly is a structural engineer. So my day job is not technically programming, professionally that is. Structural engineer is the type of engineer that makes sure that a building stands up. So we'll run calculations to confirm that whatever the architect or client is giving us will be sufficient to not fall over due to any various elements. So typically that's wind and live load, which is generally people or things in a building. It's kind of an interesting story on how I got into programming, but logically there's a lot of it's a very small sidestep to go from programming to structural engineering as far as the type of thinking goes. Front end maybe is a little bit more of a design element, but the things that go into design are very similar to how an architect would think about things as well. So there's a lot of similarities where a back-end engineer or now some of the more heavy front-end stuff maps to things that you'd see in building engineering. And the role of a designer on a website is they have similar things to how an architect deals with how they think about things. So I don't actually use React in my job at all, but I do a decent amount of programming. Our industry tends to be more reliant on Excel. And so Ryan is asking if I've considered doing web dev as a full-time career or if it's more of a side hobby. I think it's the type of web dev that I do and the things that I do it because I'm interested in it. And I fear that if I would do this as a full-time gig, that it would, I guess, sort of ruin it for me, because I'd be working on things that I'm not necessarily interested in. But it doesn't mean that these things will not be used during my day job. So I've written a lot of VBA in Excel because Excel is essentially one of the big competitions to most SaaS apps. And as far as the amount of time and effort goes to get a programming running, all the people that we work with are familiar with Excel, and it's essentially, it's a UI that is pre-built and we can kind of hook into, so we can just make things work and people are comfortable with it already. And we've used that, and we've used some Python, and all the earlier programs tended to be written in like BASIC or Fortran or that sort of thing. So I do use programming in my day job, but it's not technically part of my job description. So I have been paid for it, which I guess would technically make me a professional programmer. But you wouldn't really see that in my job description. So I think if I do end up taking this sort of stuff further, it will be some sort of app or software that will serve my industry, because I'm both familiar with the programming aspect of things and how we can wire it up and the needs of my industry. So some of this is just general interest, particularly the Gatsby stuff is general interest, but some of the other things that I haven't gotten to are starting to that I haven't gotten to on this stream are starting to bleed into things that I do in the industry. So they're good. There could be a chance that I end up streaming some of that stuff. Once I finish up this Gatsby theme work, I will likely start to stream work on another app that I had been working on for a while and took a bit of a break on. So kind of my big two interests are finance and besides career stuff is finance. And this app actually is a open source licensed web app essentially that helps somebody analyze their cash flow, which is in the personal finance space. It's generally but budgets are generally the big thing that everybody uses, which is there's value in having a budget. but much of what is done in corporation type businesses, projecting future kind of stuff, are the plans that we're putting in place now going to meet our goals in the future. There's really nothing like that in the personal space. There's a whole lot of reasons that I have done this or started working on this as open source. But I enjoy this space, but I also think it's just something that I'd like to see in the world. So, and this, the next version of Fanatter is actually styled with Theme UI. So I need to do some UI updates on this, and I've got a friend that's done some concepts, but we haven't gotten to implementing them actually. But this was my first implementation of Theme UI in the production, I guess you would call it. And that's sort of what made me decide to actually go through and convert my other themes for my personal site and a couple other websites that I host over to Theme UI as well, because it seems like it would scale. It seems to be able to scale much better, which is issues that I was running into using Bulma and SAS. So I'd actually started work on a Bulma theme, and that has gone back quite a while. But pretty much my last update was in June, and that's when I'd just updated enough that it's not breaking things, and that's when I decided I needed to start switching things over. But if you look at the commit history, Gatsby Themes was sort of introduced in January, February or so, which is about one of the I did an update in June, and then I did an update right around when themes were first starting to become experimental. And I had actually started working on this way before that. And when I first started it, that's when I realized that what was currently in Gatsby at that time was not going to be sufficient to meet all of my needs. So I had done a little bit of experimenting, and then it ended up becoming something that was, wow, I've got a lot of them in here. It ended up becoming something that was pushed into core. So you can see, I started this quite a while ago. So this whole process of doing themes was starting off with Bulma and SAS, because that's what I was comfortable with. And then I've slowly started to move things over to the Theme UI. So what do we got? I think we're probably set here. Since I do have on this example the recipes, and I believe I already have an Airtable implementation added. Yes. I think I'm also going to add, let's save all this. I think our design stuff is probably sufficient for now, and we'll sort of tweak that as we go. And it's starting to get a little bit late here, so I'm guessing the kiddo is going to be waking up and we'll head out. But let's save this. I also have a Gatsby theme recipes, which brings in it's a whole separate package. And I didn't want to have somebody reliant on this Gatsby theme that I'm working on for my homepage to be able to use this recipes. So we have a theme that basically does this, which is available at here. So we can go ahead and pull that in. And that's also pretty minimal styling right now. I gotta clean up a bunch of my actual feeder data. The black bean soup is technically correct, but the other ones aren't. So, and speak of the devil, it sounds like the kiddo is not implying that she's a devil, but it sounds like she's starting to wake up. So I'll get this saved. We'll commit that. We will put up a package or publish a new version of this package. If anybody's wanting or interested to use this, we'll need some documentation, but I think we're at a point where people can start using it. Next time I'll likely put it on my personal site. So we'll convert this site over to use all the new theme stuff that we've been working on. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Contact stuff is here. I also hang out in a couple of Discord channels, so feel free to catch me there as well. Have a good Wednesday, and we will see you next time. Bye.